Good evening, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the third episode of The Resistance Bureau, a program that highlights issues surrounding democracy and the struggle for freedom in Africa. I am your host, Dr. Chibodendere, and I'll be joined today by my friends and co-host, Jeffrey Smith. We're also joined by Professor Nick Cheeseman. Tati Molitoa, please correct me because I think I've just butchered your name, who moderates our Q&A session to close out today's show. Be sure to send us your questions via WhatsApp by using the number +263 77 623 8199. You can also follow the discussion online via Twitter at The Resistance Bureau and by using the hashtag The Resistance Bureau Live, and right now on Facebook Live. This show is also being recorded for later distribution. One quick note from my end, I have a brand new baby, so sometimes she likes to scream. So if you hear her, just ignore her and keep enjoying the show.
Thanks, Chipo, and hello, friends. Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll get right into it. As many of you know, there's an increasingly brutal crackdown underway in Zimbabwe, perpetrated by President Emerson Mnangagwa and his ruling ZANU-PF party, which has been in power since Zimbabwe's independence in 1980, longer than most Zimbabweans have been alive. Even before the latest clampdown, the United Nations documented nearly 50 cases of abductions and torture of regime critics last year alone. Things are now getting worse. Just last month, the Zimbabwe Peace Project recorded some shocking statistics. 48 recorded cases of unlawful detention, 68 cases related to assault, 168 instances of political intimidation, and most worryingly, 45 cases of abduction, most of which have been attributed to state agents. In short, Zimbabweans have experienced a significant uptick in state violence and human rights abuses over the past few weeks. And this crackdown shows no signs of abating. It has been roundly condemned by human rights groups, the Catholic Church, and by governments around the world. The level of repression has been so intense that traditional forms of protest are now impossible, forcing resistance into the digital realm, like the viral hashtag Zimbabwean Lives Matter, which has trended worldwide. Today's program will feature the latest updates from the ground in Zimbabwe, and we will interrogate whether this rising digital resistance can hold an authoritarian regime to account, and also ask what is required for meaningful change in Zimbabwe.
This is bad news for Zimbabweans, but also for the broader Southern African region. For far too long, Zimbabwe has seen its best and brightest flee the country for political and economic stability elsewhere, denying the nation some of its greatest talents and creating a steady flow of migrants that's had a significant impact on the region. Today, we have a truly stellar lineup of speakers to identify potential ways out of the crisis and capitalize on the now ongoing worldwide attention that the Zimbabwean Lives Matter hashtag movement has helped to usher in. Joining us for the special edition of the Resistance Bureau are Jestina Mukoko, Coltart, Thandekile Moyo, and Alex Magaisa. I think you know most of them. Over to you, Jeff.
Thanks so much, Chipo. Jestina, I would really like to turn to you first, since we did indeed highlight the work of the Zimbabwe Peace Project in our introduction today. You and your colleagues have been documenting human rights abuses in Zimbabwe for 2 decades now, and many Zimbabweans and outside observers alike were quite optimistic when Robert Mugabe was removed from office in November 2017. Now, even some of those early cheerleaders have acknowledged this lapse in judgment, and some have argued that what we are witnessing today is actually worse than the darkest days under Mugabe. And I was wondering what your data suggests here. Is that assessment true?
That assessment is very true, Jeff. And I think our biggest concern is that the bulk of the violations that we are recording are actually being perpetrated by security forces. And this is actually a worrying trend, especially at this time when we have the COVID-19 lockdown. And our biggest concern is that there's a lot of hiding behind enforcement of regulations, where we are finding that people's rights are actually being violated flagrantly, and there is a lot of impunity. No one really is taking account or responsibility for the actions that they are taking.
Right. And with this violent clampdown on activists such as yourself, I'm interested to know how have you and your colleagues adjusted your strategy, if at all, given the declining security situation and the persistent threats against human rights defenders countrywide, especially in light of the abuse that you have suffered in the past. I'd be interested to know how you've been forced to really adjust your strategies during these tough times.
What is important to note is that the operating environment is really caving in on us. And I think we have adopted a strategy where we are saying we are not going to keep quiet when human rights abuses are taking place. And we are going to talk about them. We are going to stand in solidarity with those whose rights are being violated. And we think that that is our contribution in terms of what is happening on the ground now. And we are really concerned in terms of the crisis that is developing.
Right. Thanks, Jestina. Chipo, over to you.
Dr. Alex Magaisa, you've written eloquently for years about the most serious topics in Zimbabwe in your weekly report, the Big Saturday Read. Our listeners can find it online. I think it's just bsr.com. On corruption and government mismanagement of state resources. You recently talked on Facebook of your sadness about not being able to go home because of your outspoken stance. What are the costs of speaking out today, and what has that done for press freedom and the ability of Zimbabweans to speak truth to power? And
well,
I'll just add that you're also very influential on Twitter, and hashtag Zimbabwean Lives Matter has been tremendously successful from an advocacy standpoint. But commentator Bruce Mchero recently argued on the continent that social media cannot free Zimbabwe alone. So I guess you can go with the first question and then pivot to the next one.
Okay, thank you so much, Chipo, and thanks everyone. I would like to thank my sister, Jestina Mukoko. A lot of respect for the work that she and other human rights defenders do in a very difficult environment. And very often, sometimes we don't see the kind of challenges, the kind of risks that they have to take in order to carry out this work. So thank you so much for that, and for documenting all these abuses and for speaking truth to power. Now, Chipo, you asked about my situation. I published something that many people did not want to touch, which was a scandal involving loans that were given by the government to farmers, but most of the farmers who benefited from this elites, political elites, and this has been on for 12 years, 13 years now, and they were refusing to give up the list of these beneficiaries. And of course, we were always asking for an opportunity to get the list. And when someone who loves Zimbabwe decided that it was time to let the cat out of the bag, I was happy to oblige, because I thought it was important in the public interest. I participated in the writing of the Constitution. One of the things that we spoke about very eloquently was the issue of transparency and accountability. So for me, it was absolutely important to make sure that there is transparency and accountability on this issue. That has obviously made some people very angry, and it's not just ZANU-PF people. The list had so many people, including business people, including church leaders, who benefited and never paid back their loans. So of course, you get threats the moment you do that, and I've had quite a few. It's to be expected, because when you expose people, people obviously get angry. My major concern, of course, is that some of the people who are exposed on the list are judges and magistrates, and so you can imagine that you would want to get refuge in the courts, but I wonder whether that would be the case. So it's probably a case of being paranoid, but it's also a case of being realistic. What is important, I think, is to understand that the struggle for democracy and the struggle for a good governance and for a better Zimbabwe is very costly. It is costly because we lose our freedom. My colleagues, Hopo Chingono, Jacob Ngarivume, are in jail at the moment. I'm sure we'll be talking about that later. But they're paying the price for speaking out. And the only reason why I'm speaking to you on Zoom is probably because I'm not within their reach at this particular point in time. But you know, it is what it is. That's what you do. Those are the sacrifices that you have to make. I love being home. I love traveling to my home, to my village. And so I talk about this very often. It's a sacrifice that has to be made, I think, for the good of Zimbabwe. Now, to the second question that you raised about social media. Well, I think that sometimes people tend to, you know, to over-focus on an issue. So they over-focus on social media as if someone is saying social media is going to save Zimbabwe. I think it's a straw man argument. Nobody says that. Nobody says social media activism alone is going to change Zimbabwe, is going to make a revolution. I think people who make that argument are making an argument that nobody has ever made. I certainly would not make that argument. But certainly what is important is that the organization and the way that people mobilize and the way that people engage and share information has improved in a very drastic and positive way as a result of social media. There are certain things that, you know, you could share in 2000. We have come a long way. 20 years ago, my sister Jestina can tell you about how things were. You know, we were using, you know, paper-based materials. We were using email, and it was difficult. Now we have social media. So I think that the point we need to understand is that social media has allowed us more space, has allowed us more opportunities to engage, to interact. You know, someone can make a judgment in the magistrate court at 2 p.m. and by 6 p.m. I would have done an analysis and shared it on social media. We could never do that 20 years ago. So I think it's very easy to underestimate the power of social media, but nobody is saying that social media will change a nation on its own. It's part of the tools, the instruments that are available to us, and we are going to use them.
Thank you so much. I think it's very insightful what you've just said about social media. Over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Chipo, and thanks, Alex. That was really illuminating. Doug, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. It's been a long day, but hanging in there.
Yeah, so I'd like to get to that, and I'd love to bring you here on that topic because you have been incredibly busy and quite successful against all seeming odds, defending the rights of those detained in Zimbabwe, including some of those individuals that Alex just mentioned, some of those we've heard about today, including Jacob and Hopewell and others. You were also in court today yourself because apparently human rights lawyers having to defend themselves is the new normal in Zimbabwe. So can you please update us on some of the key legal cases underway, including now your own, and what our global audience listening today should keep an eye on moving forward, whether they're particular cases, specific dates we should put in our calendars? What can we be doing to help in this regard?
Sure. No, thanks, Jeff. So yeah, as to some of the cases before the court, there's a lot. Of course, the most kind of high-profile ones are those of Hopewell Chingono and Jacob Ngarivume. Hopewell's bail hearing is currently underway in camera. This is a closed-door bail hearing. No one is allowed in. Which is quite an experience. And of course, you know, as all of you will be aware, Hopewell's lead counsel of choice, Beatrice Mtetwa, has now been removed from that case by the magistrate. And you know, we can discuss that further if you'd like to. There are a whole range of other cases before the courts. More than 60 people were arrested in the lead up to the 31st of July, and on that day, I'm representing some of those. as well. Two young men, Terence Guta and Loveridge Chinjwende, who were abducted by state agents. They were staging a little two-man demo holding their placards which said no to abductions, no to corruption, and they themselves were abducted, brutally tortured for many hours before eventually taken out of Harare and tortured for many hours before being handed over to the police. This is just an insight into a lot of the types of cases that are happening, you know, that ZPP have been documenting on a more kind of global or kind of comprehensive manner. Then of course, yeah, you mentioned my case. So this is a case. Well, I have a number of trials that I'm facing actually. The one I was in court today for was. It's a case that relates back to April 2019. Myself and a group of teachers I wasn't at the venue at the time actually, but a group of teachers were abducted from a venue where they had been discussing the work of Paulo Freire and his book Pedagogy of the Oppressed, again tortured for hours before being eventually being charged. That case has finally come to trial more than a year later. It was, that matter is sub judice, so I can't comment on it too much, but I can tell you what was said. The police officer who was testifying said that after they broke into, well, he didn't admit that they broke into the venue, but that's what they did. After they broke into the venue, they came into the room and they saw that there was a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and he Googled what pedagogy is, and he said, oh, pedagogy is relating to education and training, and he presumed that must be illegal. And so that's why they took everyone. That's as far as we've got in the case. He says he wasn't able to give any explanation to the court as to what actually in the content of that book constitutes an offense. So we'll wait and see. The trial continues tomorrow. So we're still waiting to hear exactly what we have done wrong.
Well, thank you for that update. We'll certainly keep our eyes and ears on that situation. And, you've painted a rather ominous picture in Zimbabwe. And last week, it reminded me that Amnesty International, in pretty stark language, something I haven't really seen them use before, noted in a press release, an ongoing witch hunt is the term they used against political and human rights activists in Zimbabwe. So I'd like to ask you, and we like to ask many of our guests who come on, what enables you personally to keep operating in that context, given the dangers you continue to face, and what can members of the international community, including many of the folks who are listening in today, what can they do to help advance your crucial work defending human rights on the ground? What concretely can we do to assist in this very grave situation?
Yeah, I mean, it is a huge challenge sometimes, finding the strength to keep going with some of the things that happen. And but I think, I mean, sort of speaking to kind of your question around what motivates me to keep going, I think often seeing the incredibly inspiring people and the work that they are doing, the people who I represent, it motivates me to keep playing the role that I can in supporting that. It really is inspiring, the many brave people who are taking action at great risk to themselves on the ground in Zimbabwe. As far as outside support goes, I think that solidarity is really important. Sometimes it feels like it doesn't amount to much. But I can tell you, as someone who has been incarcerated, that coming out of those cells into the dock, and you see the solidarity of people in the courtroom, it really is an incredible kind of encouragement. So that goes for people on the ground providing solidarity, as well as those internationally. It's been amazing to see, the solidarity coming in from globally, and with the Zimbabwean Lives Matter. We saw statements, I think was it yesterday or this week, from global church bodies representing literally hundreds of millions of Christians around the world. That was remarkable. We've seen today a statement coming out from the Johannesburg Bar in support of Beatrice Mtetwa. So these sorts of things go a long way, and I do believe that they do put pressure on government to actually abide by our constitution. Of course, they will continue to violate it, but how much more might they violate it if the rest of the world remains silent?
Right. Thanks, Doug. I appreciate that. Chipo, back over to you.
Yeah, so I'm fangirling a little bit because I absolutely love the work that Thandekile is doing, and like many of you have been following her on Twitter, where she had the hashtag ZANU-PF must go trending, and I love that she's managed to put it on everything, right? So she could be tweeting about reading a book and to say ZANU-PF must go at the end of it. So she could be tweeting about what she's eating and then to say ZANU-PF must go at the end of it. So Thandekile, obviously, I'm a huge fan. So a lot of Zimbabweans have since adopted your hashtag as their own for their own expressions on social media. The hashtag Zimbabwean Lives Matter movement further builds on this and compounds the shared frustrations and aspirations of all Zimbabweans, both in and outside the country. I have a really tough question for you. We agree that the hashtag has been an advocacy success, but is there a risk that this simply makes us feel good and that the government will just ignore it and go about their own business?
Hi, everyone. I'm humbled to be here and quite honored. I'll just get right into it. Well, the hashtag does give people an illusion of success. When you see, like, there's a time when it was trending almost every day for so long that it would give this illusion that, wow, finally everybody is talking about this, maybe some that will happen. But what we've realized from social media is that the hype usually just stays on social media. But I wouldn't want to trivialize that and say that then means that the hashtag is not working, because as it stands, so many people that have used the hashtag are being attacked by the government. It means that it's exerting some sort of pressure on the regime. And I think what we now need to do is take it out of social media, because what's happening now is that it's trending on social media, but so many people are not on social media. We have in Zimbabwe, I think 50% of the people are on social media, but most of them being on WhatsApp versus to being on Twitter. So what would need to happen is to find a way to actually make this ZANU-PF must go trend outside of social media. So that's to answer your first question. I didn't quite get the second one.
No, so I haven't asked the second one yet. So for many Zimbabweans who've been victims of torture, political violence, and abductions, the question often arises: how do we connect the demands for justice and go beyond the hashtag? So how do we make this connection between what we're saying online and the actual demand for justice for the people that have been arrested? So we know that Hopewell and Jacob have been in police custody for about 3 months now, or am I exaggerating? But it feels like it's been forever. Well, 2020 feels like it's been 3 years long. So how do we get justice for people once we move offline?
Okay, so basically ZANU-PF must go is a call for justice, because the realization is that everything that's going wrong in the country is being done by ZANU-PF. So what ZANU-PF has done basically is take charge of everything that is supposed to give us democracy. So that's all the institutions that are supposed to bring democracy. So as it stands, we see that ZANU-PF is in charge of the judiciary. We see that even in the way they're handling Hopewell's case. Under normal circumstances, I mean, Hopewell is charged with inciting violence for a demonstration that had not yet happened. The demonstration date came and it went, and the guy is still in custody of the police, and they've done so many things to frustrate the law. They've taken his lawyer off the case and all that, meaning that they have captured the judiciary. So the judiciary being captured by ZANU-PF means that for there to be any chance of justice happening in Zimbabwe, ZANU-PF must go. They've not only captured the judiciary, they've also captured the avenue through which we can choose our own leaders, which is elections. So you'll find that ZEC is under the firm control of ZANU-PF, whereby we would say, okay, fine, this has happened in Zimbabwe in these 5 years between 2018 and 2023. We don't want these guys in power anymore. We're going to vote them out of power. But in Zimbabwe, that's not possible because ZANU-PF is in charge of the Electoral Commission. So we know that come 2023, if we go to vote with things as they stand, ZANU-PF is going to be in power. So we are in a situation where the state is captured and there can be no justice if the state is captured. They've captured the army, they've captured the police, they've captured the courts, they've captured every avenue that we can use to get justice. And you'll see that my work is mostly about Gukurahundi, the genocide that happened in 1983. The reason why I'm focused on Gukurahundi is because we want justice for victims. So what is happening now is atrocity upon atrocity by the same perpetrators. Gukurahundi, 2008, Mrambatwina, the same perpetrators keep perpetrating these atrocities on the people and getting away with it because there are no avenues for justice. They've logged all those avenues for justice, which leaves us with the only option available, which is protests. So for justice to happen in Zimbabwe, I believe everybody has to be brave enough to say, okay, what is stopping us from getting justice for anything? It's ZANU-PF, and therefore ZANU-PF must go.
Jeff, I think I have time for one extra question, do I?
Please, yeah, go.
This.
Yeah, please
yeah,
go
we
ahead.
didn't include this, but I wanted to ask Thandekile, Jestina, Alex, and Doug, if you could just say very briefly, how else can people support the work that you're doing, number one? And Alex has already alluded to his thoughts on safety, but also I think to really hear from Thandekile as a young person, and also Doug, I would want to hear from Doug how we can encourage other, white Zimbabweans to get engaged and to get involved, and Thandekile to speak to what else we can do to support people that might be from outside of Harare who might have some real apprehension about getting involved. And then I think, Jestina, you might speak to the generational, how we can have sort of this generational unity in moving forward in our work in Zimbabwe. So maybe we'll start with Thandekile, Jestina, Doug, then finish off with Alex.
Okay, so what we've seen happening so far concerning the people that are incarcerated by the police is that we see the high profile people having these trending hashtags on Twitter, free Hopewell, free Jacob. But you'll find that, as Doug said earlier, there's hundreds of people that are incarcerated. So in my opinion, the fight needs to stop being about individuals. We already know that people are incarcerated by the state. So the fight must be to free everybody that has been incarcerated. And the best way to do that is to find a way to capture the fight so that it goes beyond free Hopewell, who is an individual that has been incarcerated, and talking about him alone being an injustice to the other people that have been incarcerated and no one's talking about them because we don't know them. It's not even about them being outside of Harare or in Harare, but it's now about the government now realizes that there are so many other small voices that are unknown, and they abduct these people, they torture these people, and nobody gets to hear about them. So I think to help these people, the fight has to be contextualized differently. We now have to have, Zimbabwean Lives Matter is one of the best ways to do it, because what it's doing, it's saying that everyone in Zimbabwe matters and we must fight for all those people. So we need to contextualize this fight so that it's not just about individuals, because the moment Hopewell is free and the moment Jacob is free, then does that mean that we've won the fight? So I've always been worried about individualizing these calls for justice.
Mm-hmm. Jestina?
Thanks for those questions, Chipo. I think for me, in terms of the support, in terms of the work that we do, we appeal as the Zimbabwe Peace Project that if people are aware of any violations happening in their communities, they should call us. And I think it's in light with what Thandekile has just said, that when we caught on to the Zimbabweans' lives matter, we were basically looking at every Zimbabwean and not really wanting to individualize these issues, because it's mainly those who are not known who suffer the most. And so we really encourage communities to say if they suspect that something must have happened in their community, they talk to us. And the Zimbabwe Peace Project operates through a network of monitors. And I would say probably we cast the net wider, and our monitors help us to pick up in terms of some of these individuals who are not known. And most of them, you will find them in our database. And I think when we are talking about the generational differences, I think when we are talking about Zimbabweans' lives matter, it doesn't matter how old you are, because an injustice can come at any age. And we are basically saying, let's cover that gap in terms of our ages so that we are able to all come together and recognize the importance of how the rights of Zimbabweans need to be respected. We are not getting this from anywhere else. We are basically getting it from the Constitution. And we are all agreed that the Constitution is the supreme law of Zimbabwe. And when we look at Chapter 4, it's got everything in it. And all we are asking is we need the Constitution to be enforced and implemented to the spirit and letter. And we do not want a situation where we suspect that there is no sincerity in terms of applying the Constitution, because we are also recognizing that there is a lot of selective application of the law, where you find that when other people are doing something, like now during the lockdown, you are finding that people from ZANU-PF will gather and no one is arrested. Get people from civil society gathering, or people in their small communities gathering, they are arrested on the basis that they have flouted COVID-19 regulations. And so we are saying, really, let's just look at the fact that the lives of Zimbabweans do matter.
Mm-hmm. Doug and Alex, and just very briefly, so that we can move on to the Q&A. Doug, you're muted. Doug, you're muted.
Sorry. The question
right.
to me, I think, was how to get more white Zimbabweans involved. And I think, the answer is really similar to what both Thandekile and Jestina have said, in that I think the power of this idea, Zimbabwean Lives Matter, is a very unifying message. It encapsulates everyone, whether you're old, young, black, white. And so I think that is a powerful message, and already we have seen a diversity of people getting involved. I think it's the same answer as well in terms of the types of actions that we seek to engage in, nonviolent action towards creating the Zimbabwe we want. There needs to be a diversity of action, and there needs to be different lanes for people to participate in. So I think one of the things I loved about the recent solo demos that were going on is that there was like different thresholds. You know, someone who is more on the fearful side can take a picture with the placard covering their face and send it to someone unconnected to them and post it. Someone who's feeling more bold can take their placard and go and march down the street. And so, you know, that speaks to different people, and different people have different senses of vulnerabilities that might be connected to any you know, any number of things, whether that's race or age or you know, where you stay, etc., or personal issue, or, you know, personal things. But I think we need to recognize that different people can play different roles, and to create as many avenues as possible for people to participate in action for change.
Thank you, Doug. And Alex?
Okay, very quickly, Chipo. I think that the power of Zimbabwe Lives Matter lies in the message that it has sent out, not only to Zimbabweans, but also to people outside Zimbabwe. I have to say that we have had some serious crises over the last 2 years. In August 2018, in January 2019, but we did not have the kind of momentum and attention that Zimbabwe is receiving today. But you know, the attention that Zimbabwe is receiving today is a culmination of all these things that have happened over the last 2 years, you know, from a big high after the coup when everybody was so euphoric to where we are right now. You know, I don't know how low we can get, but we are in a very low space. But what I like about the Zimbabwe Lives Matter hashtag is that it unites and it brings people together. You are getting even the Catholic bishop talking about Zimbabwe Lives Matter, something that they probably would not even have done 2 weeks ago. You know, we are getting people from all over the world talking about it. It's a language, I have no idea who coined it, but whoever did is a genius, because they rode on something that is so powerful, the Black Lives Matter phenomenon. And it's a language that is understood around the world. And I think that this is why it has been so phenomenal in terms of how it has captured the hearts and minds of people. We're having lots of people, leaders in South Africa. We are having ministers like Lindiwe Zulu coming up, you know, and for the first time admitting publicly that there is a political crisis in Zimbabwe. That's huge, you know, that's not a small thing at all. So I don't think that people should underestimate the success of the efforts that they are putting. Of course, it's not enough. We are dealing with a heavily militarized regime, but I think it's an important step that Zimbabwe is taking, and people should not be deterred.
Thank you so much. I am moving over to Jeff.
Thank you, Chipo, and thanks to all of our wonderful speakers. We're going to switch gears a bit right now. We're going to turn it over to Dr. Nick Cheeseman and our colleague Mantade for a question and answer session. I think we may have broken the record for most questions submitted in the lead up to this show, so we wanted to devote a few more minutes to this if possible. So Dr. Cheeseman, maybe over to you first to lay some groundwork.
Thanks so much, and thanks to all of the speakers. The first thing to say is that because we've got a great panel and so many of you, we're going to try and direct the questions a little bit so everyone doesn't have to answer everything. And we're going to have a bunch of different questions coming up. To get us started, I wanted to pick up on some of the things that Alex was saying and to think a little bit maybe about how the kind of political context is driving this. I think it seems to some of us, you know, who are watching this from the outside, that there's multiple struggles going on. And one of the struggles going on right now is the struggle within ZANU-PF itself, potentially between the military faction, the civilian faction, within those factions as well. And some of that uncertainty and some of the rumors about what's happening and the prospects, for example, the weakness and vulnerability of President Mnangagwa himself, are one of the things that's driving the violence that we're seeing. So Alex, maybe I could come to you because you write the sort of Big Saturday read and you've written so much about these different issues. Could you give us a bit of an insight into what you actually think is happening within ZANU-PF, within the military, and how that's affecting this? And does that suggest to you that actually this is going to get worse rather than better in terms of, say, the repression and brutality?
Thank you so much, Nick. I think that we have to go back to, November 2017, the coup that ushered the current President Mnangagwa and the regime in power. And, I'm one of those people, along with perhaps yourself, Nick, and many others, who called it out as a coup at the time when many people were not willing to do so. And it was important to do so because you have to name something for what it is if you want to understand what is going on. And I think that the Zimbabwe that we have right now, I know that a lot of people have been disappointed by what they felt was a very good thing at the beginning. Some of us never thought it was a good thing at the beginning because it was a military coup. And a military coup is not a picnic, to use a term that I used at the time. And that's why we now have a regime that is obviously run with a civilian facade, but with the military having the bulk of power. So is there attrition? I believe there is some attrition. I believe that like in all cases when there's been a heist, some people are not satisfied with what they get, and they fight in order to be better positioned. For me, I think one of the most important episodes during this whole period was the bizarre press statement, which was done by the Joint Operations Command a few weeks ago, probably a couple of months ago now, in which they were denying rumors of a coup. That was bizarre because nobody comes out to deny that there is a rumor of a coup. And that obviously set a lot of tongues wagging and people wondering what is actually going on. And now, if there were any rumors, I think that those rumors actually got more imported. People started talking about the coup and the possibility of a coup than they did before that press statement. So there is some attrition going on. ZANU-PF is a very complex organization. It's very difficult to tell what goes on in there. Even in the lead up to the November 2017 coup, there were all sorts of theories flying around. Some people saying, well, there would never be a coup. The military can never go against Mugabe. But that's exactly what they did. So I don't dismiss the rumors that are flying around about the attrition between President Mnangagwa and his vice president, the General Chiwenga, and others perhaps. But for me, and people who are better experts at civil military relations than me, but I do eavesdrop when they talk. And for me, it's the issue of those soldiers in the junior ranks. I think that this is where the problem is, and perhaps we might talk about Mali later. And so I think when we focus a lot on the generals, I think we might be missing the point because the problem might be lower down the ranks of the military because those people might have very different worldview. And there might be some attrition between the younger generation of soldiers and the older generation of soldiers. But certainly, I don't think that there is a harmony in ZANU-PF house. We have seen the old guard, the Patrick Chinamasas, Obet Mpofus, coming out more forcefully, more aggressively. The Politburo is meeting very regularly. Of course, it has always met on Wednesdays, but it's being announced. And so, in a way, there's so much drama around it. And the aggression suggests to me that clearly they are trying to protect someone, or there is a factional battle taking place in there and someone is trying to assert themselves. We saw one of the ZANU-PF leaders getting suspended a few weeks ago, being accused of trying to overthrow President Mnangagwa. Now, we saw those things happening before November 2017, but they were going after the smaller guys when they knew very well who they were going after, in terms of the top guys. So I think that the challenges that Zimbabwe is facing at the moment, certainly there is an influence in what is going on in ZANU-PF itself as a party which, in my opinion, is no longer what it used to be. It is essentially a shell that is being supported by the military. Without the military, I don't think that ZANU-PF can survive.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for that fantastic analysis. I've got a question also for, I'll make sure we get lots of questions from the audience, we can roll it in. So I'll say it and then I will go to Mantale to get some questions from the audience and people can pick up on it when they respond. And that's to pick up on something that Doug was saying. I mean, one of the things that I find really interesting is we seem to have what I'm kind of writing about as almost like a patchwork quilt protest. People are not allowed to gather together, partly because of COVID, partly because of the repressive government. And so we see people taking pictures of themselves, protesting individually, alone, in different parts of Zimbabwe, and then those pictures being shared on social media. So effectively on social media, you have a big mass protest, but it's composed of people being, you know, basically protesting on their own, in their own spaces, often anonymously with their placards over their faces to protect their own identities. And I think that evolution of a new form of protest is actually something really interesting and something that it's worth us further. Are we going to see more of this kind of anonymous? You know, Doug, I noticed that you were sharing pictures of people who had shared images with you over email anonymously, and you were then sharing on Twitter. So it seems to me that social media is kind of allowing a new form of fragmented protest. I think, Doug, you called it popular protests or personal protests. And I'd love for all of you to reflect a little bit on how protest is evolving in Zimbabwe and what that means. Can that kind of fragmented patchwork quilt protest be a new way of kind of holding a government to account, or does it have the same limitations of the hashtags we've been talking about? But that's it for me. Over to Mantale to pick up some of the themes coming in on the hotlines, and then we'll come back to our fantastic guests for their responses. Mantale.
Thank you so much, Prof. So I'm going to give a question to each of the panelists. The first one is addressed to, I've assigned it to Alex Magaisa. It says, is the opposition party doing enough to provide leadership and coherence in opposition activism? It also has a follow-up question that talks about what form of leadership do we need to look forward to, and where does it come from? How do we ensure that leadership? And then the other question is for Thandekile. What plausible combination of internal and external pressure can now be brought to bear fruit towards regime change? What can we do both internally and outside to make sure that we get what we're crying for through this hashtag? And then Doug, your question is there any hope for restoring judicial integrity? What should be done and by who? And then the question for Jestina is, are there facilities outside of government that can be made accessible to the victims of sexual violence committed during this period of political violence to have biological evidence collected and stored for future prosecutions? Yeah, so I think I'll take, I'll go with Alex first, and then Thandekile, Doug, and then Jestina.
Okay, thank you, Matata. Thank you so much for that. Now, my question is whether the opposition party is doing enough. Now, my assumption, since the questioner is not here to answer me, is that by the opposition party, they are essentially referring to the MDC alliance, yes, which is the main opposition party in Zimbabwe, despite all the other nonsense that has been taking place since March this year. Well, the way I want to answer this question is with a reflection to our history. If you go back to the 1960s, maybe even late 50s, when the new sort of black nationalist parties began to come up and try and fight against colonialism, the colonial regime, one of the things that they discovered was that it was very easy to crush down a political party, because what the Rhodesian regime would simply do was to ban the political party. So they would come back and form another political party. So you have NDP, then you have ZAPU, and then afterwards, the other split, and then they formed ZANU. And then even afterwards, you had other parties coming up, the ANC. All these things were done as a way of evolving and trying to navigate a very difficult political terrain. Now, I want to come back to where we are. The political party for me, and I've written about this before, I just can't remember the title of my BSR. And I say that I think people may place their hopes on the wrong horse if they think that the organized opposition political parties will lead protests. Because it's very easy for the regime to crush an organized political party, because an organized political party operates according to the rules of politics. And everybody who looks to them, they also look to them to operate in accordance with the rules of politics. If you go back to 2018, when the elders came to Zimbabwe before the elections, there was a lot of criticism of the MDC alliance, and it was criticized because they were supposedly not behaving like a political party should behave, like a government in waiting should behave. In other words, once you are in an organized platform, then you are going to comply with certain rules, and even your own behavior, the way you do things, you do them in accordance with those rules. You've got to comply. And like I said, it's very easy for the regime to go after the leaders of that political party. It's very easy for the ruling party to just crush the organized political party. And so my argument at the time when I wrote was that if there is any salvation, it will come from a popular movement which is outside the confines of organized politics. And so what we are seeing with Zimbabwean Lives Matter, and this has made life very difficult for ZANU-PF, because if you remember before the July 31, Jacob Ngaruvume, who is currently in jail, and he's the man who first called for those demonstrations. And instead of focusing on Jacob Ngaruvume, Patrick Chinamasa and ZANU-PF were very keen to focus on the MDC alliance, because for them, there is only one enemy, and that enemy is the MDC alliance. They would so love to see the MDC alliance being at the forefront, because then it's easy to go after. But you see, they can't go after the MDC alliance because apart from a few leaders in the MDC alliance who have been vocal, the party itself has not actually been on the forefront of this particular movement. So in my opinion, I still hold, don't expect too much from the organized opposition political parties to do these things that people are asking for, because they are so easy a target for the regime. This is going to have to be done through a popular movement such as that which is coalesced around the Zimbabwe Lives Matter, and something that is harder for the regime to target. So yeah, going back, they can't ban the MDC alliance like Smith used to do, but I couldn't take it away from them. They might even do it, but we have seen them trying to do as much as possible with the decimation of the MDC alliance, through the surrogate political entities and parties that they've been sponsoring in order to essentially, decimate the MDC alliance. So it will be very difficult. I think I understand why people want to see the main opposition party being at the forefront. But I think that it's a bit naive to think that the regime will just sit back, because that's exactly what they're waiting for. And it will become so easy for them to crush anything that there's going to be a new way to do things. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. The next question is Thandekile. I hope you still remember the question. Thandekile, are you there?
Sorry, I muted. Okay, I was saying I remember the question, and it's about how we can combine internal and external pressure. So yes. I think how I want to answer this question is to say that there are two fights here, right? There is the fight by Zimbabweans to get freedom for themselves. And this fight by Zimbabweans for us to get freedom is the internal part of this. And then now there is Zimbabwean Lives Matter, which is a recognition by the international community that there's something happening in Zimbabwe, and that the world can no longer keep quiet while that is going on. So I believe that it is the prerogative of Zimbabweans to then articulate what exactly is happening in Zimbabwe. And that's where social media comes in. On social media, we have found a platform that equalizes all of us. There is, everyone has access to social media. So that means this notion that there's some voiceless people out there doesn't work on social media. It means now everybody can come on social media and say, today when I was at the supermarket, this is what happened to me. This is what the government of Zimbabwe is doing. So this means everybody now has a voice because of social media. And what this platform also does, social media gives us direct access to the government. So it means that Zimbabweans internally need to take advantage of this platform and each and every day hold these leaders accountable. We have Nick Mangwana, the Secretary of Information, posting propaganda on social media every day. Zimbabweans have to take it upon themselves to question that propaganda and to actually go onto whatever propaganda is posted and correct the narrative, because usually it's a battle of narratives. There's this narrative that everything is fine. So it's our responsibility to say, no, things are not fine, and to actually articulate how they are not fine. So I believe that internally, what we must do is continue what we've been doing on social media, continue conscientizing each other and teaching each other exactly what the problem is. So I believe the fight internally is actually that ZANU-PF must go. This is what Zimbabweans can say. The international community cannot call for ZANU-PF to go. It's not their mandate to do that. It's the mandate of Zimbabweans. So I believe Zimbabweans on social media must continue to call for ZANU-PF to go. And this includes Zimbabweans in the diaspora who are always crying to be involved in Zimbabwean politics because they are not allowed to vote. But social media gives them the opportunity to actually participate in Zimbabwean politics. And we have to divorce ourselves from politics being a game of supporting someone to politics being a game that we must each participate in, which is, I think, what Alex was saying about this being a people's movement versus being a movement by an opposition party. If it was an opposition party, would probably support and not necessarily have to participate. But because this involves us doing something about problems affecting us directly, we have to participate. And that participation involves us going on social media and doing all those things. Now, the international community, I think, I don't know if I should call it a responsibility, because I don't think it's a forced matter, but it would be good for the international community to actually highlight these problems that are going on in Zimbabwe and support Zimbabweans in their struggle, because we are repressed and therefore it's difficult for us to actually go and protest and change our own government. But with the support of the international community, I think it will make things easier for us to do that. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Thandekile. And then, Doug, your question was, is there any hope for restoring judicial integrity? What should be done and by who?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is certainly while there's life, there's hope, and we have to keep clinging to hope. So I think there is hope to restore judicial integrity. There's a lot that needs to be done by many different people. I think we all have a responsibility. Certainly, as lawyers, as officers of the court. We have a duty to keep on plugging away at trying to use what little space there is within the judicial system to protect rights and uphold rights. But I think there's a huge amount that ordinary people can do around the issue of the rule of law. I wrote an op-ed a couple of months ago called "How People Power Strengthens the Rule of Law," and the idea I was trying to explore in that is that that ordinary people have a real role to play in establishing the rule of law. We saw that with the role that ordinary people played when Pastor Ivan was arrested, the mass gathering outside, which led to a remarkable outcome of his case being altogether thrown out and all charges dropped against him. We've seen that in Malawi, the combination of mass action on the streets together with a judiciary that really took on the responsibility of upholding the rule of law and the integrity of Malawi's elections. We've seen that all around the world. Even famous cases in South Africa, the TAC case, was combined, which was a huge breakthrough for health rights in South Africa, was combined with a mass movement on the ground fighting for HIV rights in South Africa. So I think there's a real role for ordinary people to go to play. You know, going to Nick's comment or question around you know, the emergent new forms of protest. I think we need to explore those, and we need to explore those urgently around the issue of judicial integrity, because it's a huge challenge that the country is facing. I think that it is an exciting new development. I do think that while, you know, as Alex opened with in his opening comments, social media is a powerful tool. I don't think it can be the only tool. So we do need to keep thinking about how do we start to translate online action to on the ground action. And I think those solo demos were a really good bridging way, because yes, you're taking action on the ground, but you kind of sharing it on social media, but it's a little bit more than just tweeting Zimbabwean Lives Matter. You're making a placard, you're doing your little demonstration wherever it is, even if it's in the privacy of your home. You're building that courage as citizens to take nonviolent action. But I think we have to keep thinking about how do we be more creative, more innovative, and how do we build that process so that there's real momentum growing rather than just being stagnating and doing one thing over and over again, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much, Doug. And then the question that's going to Jestina is, are there facilities outside of government that can be made accessible to the victims of sexual violence committed during this period of political violence to have biological evidence collected and stored for future prosecutions?
Thanks, Mantate. For a moment there, I thought we had a dark force amongst us. Prof. Nick Chisman kept on getting into the dark, and I wasn't sure what was really happening there. Indeed, we do have facilities, and I think I want to speak about those facilities not being within government. A lot of people do not have confidence, no trust in institutions of government to trust them with such sensitive information. So there are facilities that are available where people can actually have their stories told, and those stories being documented. I have been on a panel where I have been accused that you are not a law enforcement agent, and so why should people be coming to you and telling you their stories? The reason why people are looking for alternatives in terms of their stories being told is because they do not trust the institution of the police. They're actually afraid to approach the police, because in most cases they are not sure in terms of whether when they go and report, will they be arrested while they are there reporting something that has happened to them or something that would have happened to a loved one. So we do have those facilities outside because we want people to be confident enough to be able to share their stories. You will appreciate that when we are talking about sexual assault, rape, those are matters that are really sensitive, that could also even affect the life of an individual after they have reported them. So those facilities are there, and we are emphasizing the issue of being able to document for use in the future.
Thank you so much. So what I'm going to do now for the last round of questions, I'm just going to give two questions. So one will go to Doug and Alex, and then the other will go to Jestina and Thandekile. So this will be your sign-off statement as well. So for Doug and Alex, the question is, will the major concerns about the Cybersecurity and Data Protection Bill have a chilling effect on the use of social media within Zimbabwe and create another tool for government's witch hunt? And then the second question, which is going to Thandekile and Jestina, says, what will it take for the international community, that is the SADC, the African Union, and even the United Nations, to intervene in the crisis occurring in Zimbabwe? So I'll start with Doug, go to Alex, then go to Thandekile and block off with Jestina.
Yeah, sure. The bill that you mentioned is very concerning in terms of, particularly there's major concerns in the bill around protection of whistleblowers who don't have sufficient protection in terms of that bill if it is passed. I think that there are already a number of laws on our statute books that have that chilling effect. Which are used to prosecute people for social media. So to some extent, that's nothing new. Hopewell and Jacob are both being prosecuted for things that they said on social media, using laws which that have been there on the statute books since Rhodesian days, before social media existed. But I think there's a number of bills coming through the pipeline which are we need to be very concerned about. The most drastic of which are the constitutional amendments, and that we need to talk more about and push back harder on, because if anything is going to utterly decimate Zimbabwean democracy, it'll be if those constitutional amendments are passed.
Thanks, Doug. I'm not going to repeat what my young learned brother has already said here very eloquently. Suffice to say that the cybersecurity bill, or whatever it's called, is quite simply a part of the big brother, state, the mechanism. You find this kind of bill in many countries around the world, even in very progressive countries. Now, the Zimbabwean government doesn't need this bill to do what it's doing. As Doug has said, they're already doing it even without it. So they can do whatever they want. The point that I would love to make, as this is in closing, is to say that the life of a dissenter in Zimbabwe, whether on social media or outside social media, is a very difficult life, because you've got an executive which is highly repressive. You've got a legislature which simply rubber stamps the decisions of the executive. It never questions what the executive is asking them to do, which speaks to the constitutional amendments that Doug has made reference to. And then, unfortunately, we now have, and I say this with the greatest of respect to some of the very reasonable judges that we have on our bench, but we have a judiciary that has shown some very worrying tendencies. And in particular, what we saw yesterday with the removal of Beatrice Mnangagwa from Moyo Ching'ono's case was abysmal. It was appalling. I have never seen anything like that before. I read the judgment. It's a ridiculous judgment. And I don't understand how anybody could have come to that conclusion. But it speaks to the nature of our judiciary. And for me, this is the most worrying trend, because at least in the past, if you had problems with the executive, if you had problems with parliament, you could run to the courts and you would get some respite. But as things stand, with the way that Moyo Ching'ono and Jacob Garivum are being treated, I really worry for Zimbabwe and its citizens. I worry for us.
Thank you so much. Thandekile and Jestina, what will it take for the international community to intervene in the Zimbabwean crisis?
Okay, so that's a very difficult one, because I personally have lost faith in the international community, because I find myself asking, okay, when we talk about the international community, who are we talking about? I mean, in your question, you mentioned SADC, AU, and probably UN. And these are organs that have watched the crisis in Zimbabwe unfolding for 40 years. I mean, from the day that ZANU-PF got in power, their ideology was a one-party state, which is the most undemocratic thing that you can ever come across. I mean, a party coming outright and saying, what we want for Zimbabwe is a one-party state. And they went on to kill 20,000 civilians to protect that one-party state, and the international community didn't do anything. And then in the 90s, 99, 2000, and so forth, ZANU-PF, again, to protect a one-party state, murdered so many MDC members and a lot of white farmers, and the international community really didn't do anything. And then in this new dispensation in August 1, 2018, they murdered in cold blood in front of all these observers that had come to observe elections, at least 6 people, and so many were injured, and the international community didn't do anything. So this says to me, I mean, when we say, what is the international community supposed to do? Is it like what we wish they would do? If it's about what we wish they would do, well, then ideally to me, the international community would have to act, because ZANU-PF has committed crimes against humanity. With the enforced disappearances that we're seeing, recently they abducted and tortured Tawana Mchehiwa, a 22-year-old a journalism student. And then you have international law telling you that's a crime against humanity, and forcibly disappearing someone and torturing them. It means it's a crime in the eyes of international law. But the international community is watching as this is happening. So I honestly don't know what the international community, what it will take for them to intervene, but it hasn't taken the deaths of 20,000 civilians. It hasn't taken the arrest of journalists like Hopewell, who's an award-winning journalist for award-winning newspapers. It has not taken the torture of those 3 MDC women. So I believe it is up to us Zimbabweans to save ourselves, basically. I don't think the international community will do anything. They've never done anything. And we might have to wake up to that reality and take it upon ourselves to free ourselves.
Thank you so much, Thandekile. Madam Jestina, please close for us, and then I'll throw it back to Jeff and Chipo.
Thank you very much. I think Thandekile has said a lot there in terms of SADC, AU, and UN. Let me say that probably last year we were kind of encouraged when we saw special rapporteurs coming into the country. But I think sadly, all their reports have kind of been rubbished. We thought we were taking there was a new way of doing things in getting the rapporteurs coming in, but it seems that no one is taking their reports to heart. And we are all aware that SADC has they've just had a summit, and the issues that we are talking about in terms of the crisis never made it to the agenda. And I actually remember listening to the presser by the Minister of Information. She was actually saying that Zimbabwe is actually not going to be on the SADC agenda. But while we are saying that, yes, we know that there is the principle of subsidiarity and also the issue of sovereignty. But I think what we are facing is really Zimbabweans losing their right to dignity. I think if you consider, when we are looking in terms of the region, we are seeing our fathers, our mothers, our brothers, our sisters doing the most absurd for them to be able to move to South Africa, to move to Botswana, to move to Mozambique, for them to be able, just to be able to make a living. You are seeing bodies being brought together with food, being put in a compartment with food. And for me, what else do people want to see in terms of Zimbabweans having lost their right to dignity? And all we are saying by saying that Zimbabweans' lives matter is that people really watch this way. We have seen a statement come from the AU, and that has been rebuffed. We saw some statements coming from the UN, and all those have been rebuffed. And I think it is important that they take it from the people who are feeling the pinch, because at the moment, really, we are saying as Zimbabweans, we cannot breathe.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Jeff.
Wow. Thank you so much, Nick and Mentade, for facilitating that really excellent session. And thanks so much, of course, to our listeners for taking the time to join us today. According to our last look, we had over 5,000 unique views on Facebook alone. So thank you for joining us. Thank you to our inspiring panel and to my co-host, Dr. Chipo Dendere. The response to the Resistance Bureau continues to be overwhelming for us, and we are so appreciative and humbled because truly it has been our amazing speakers, including those from today, who make this show what it is. So please do keep fighting the good fight. We are with you. And as I think we've learned today, the world is indeed watching. Do not hesitate in the meantime to follow up with us on our website, theresistancebureau.com, and by signing up for our newsletter there. After each episode, including today, we compile an extensive reading list of relevant materials and resources that allows interested folks to learn more, and we hope that you do. You can also stay up to date by visiting our social media platforms on Twitter and Facebook, mainly, but also on Instagram and YouTube. And we are happy to carry on these conversations there. Chipo, over to you to close us out.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to everybody who joined us. We are very much aware that there are so many conversations happening online on Zimbabwe. There's so many people who care about what is happening in our country. And so we do not take it lightly that you took time out of your day to be with us. It's been a pleasure to host with Jeff, whose work I've long admired. Thank you, Nick, for inviting me to co-host this. Thank you to Mantate for the questions and for organizing that very well. And a special thank you to Peter Jerry, who has done all the behind the scenes work. We couldn't have done this without him. Before I go off, I just want to say that I don't want people to leave this feeling disheartened. The world is watching, and I think when the world watches, sometimes the response is not immediate, but there is a sense that those who do wrong against innocent people will be isolated, and that justice will come, and justice will come as long as Zimbabweans keep speaking out that Zimbabweans' lives matter, as long as our friends and our neighbors in South Africa, in Zambia, in Malawi, in Tanzania, and Kenya keep speaking up so that the African voices are heard. We hope that our friends over the oceans in the UK, the US, Australia will speak up, but truly the work that Zimbabweans are doing, those on this panel, those in the jails, doesn't go unrecognized. So I hope today you take a moment of silence for everyone who has been wrongfully incarcerated by the government and the people that we've lost over the years due to misrule and government brutality. And thank you so much for participating with us today.
Bye.